I have the authority to inspect your grandfather's cabin whether you approve or not." That's what the woman shrieked straight into my face, through a door I hadn't even opened yet. She was shouting like I owed her something. She claimed to be the president of our community's HOA. But here's the kicker: we lived deep in the Colorado woods. There wasn't a homeowners association within 50 miles of us. Still, this woman didn't seem to care one bit. She stood there, clutching a clipboard and a stack of what looked like very official documents. Her eyes blazed with this sort of unearned confidence that comes from believing you're entitled to run everything around you. She thought her stack of paperwork and commanding tone would be enough to make anyone comply. What she didn't realize was that when my grandfather finally did open that door, the first thing she'd be met with wouldn't be compliance. See, a broken bar and the sound that followed would change everything. You'll definitely want to stick around to see how this all played out, because things went from weird to unbelievable fast. Also, feel free to drop a comment and share your wildest HOA run-in with the Harper Stories family. I'm Jake Morrison. By the way, just 3 months ago, I thought I was making the smartest move of my life, leaving behind the noise and stress of the city to settle into my grandfather's old cabin in the heart of Colorado wilderness. At 25, working as a remote software developer post-pandemic, the idea of coding surrounded by pine trees instead of sirens and email alerts was too good to pass up. The cabin sat on 40 acres of untouched forest, land that had been passed down from my great-grandfather to my grandfather William completely legally ours for more than 6 decades. No HOAs, no neighborhood committees, no suburban nonsense like paint color approvals or lawn height regulations. The title was clean, the property lines were clearly documented, and I'd even double-checked with the county myself twice to be sure. This was meant to be my escape. The kind of place where the biggest decision of the day was whether to drink my morning coffee on the front porch or the back deck while watching deer drift through the trees. The cabin itself was a beautiful 2-story log home, wrapped in a porch my great-grandfather built himself in 1962. An American flag hung from the front post, a fixture that had been there since I was a kid. It wasn't extravagant or oversized, just a standard 3x5 flag fluttering proudly in the crisp mountain air. Weather-worn but still dignified, it reminded me of what my grandfather always said, that it represented the freedom his father fought for during WI. To me, it symbolized the right to live independently, without someone constantly hovering over you with rules and regulations. That's what I thought I was getting by moving out here: freedom, peace, and quiet. That Tuesday morning in late September began just like the others, calm and focused. I was deep into debugging a frustrating authentication system for a client's online store. My coffee had already gone cold next to my laptop, forgotten as I worked at the kitchen table. Outside, the forest whispered with birdsong and the gentle rustling of pine needles, a natural background track that always helped me zone in on tough problems. I'd been up since 5 a.m., making the most of the early hours when my mind was sharpest and the rural internet still held up. But right at 7 a.m., that calm shattered. Someone began hammering on the front door like they were trying to break it down. No polite knock, no doorbell, just furious, repetitive pounding. My heart leapt. My fight or flight response kicked in before I even stood up. I nearly dumped coffee on my keyboard trying to react, and nearly lost a full hour of unsaved work in the process. I hit save, grabbed my mug more out of reflex than anything and headed to the door. I figured maybe a hiker had gotten lost, or maybe a forest ranger had urgent news of fire danger, a bear sighting, something serious. Instead, I found a woman in her early 50s, standing on my porch like she belonged there. She wore a sharply tailored black suit, completely out of place in the middle of nowhere. She clutched a leather-bound clipboard like it was a badge of authority and had the kind of short, sculpted haircut that screamed, "Let me speak to your supervisor," from a mile away. Despite the early hour and the dusty dirt roads leading to my cabin, her makeup was flawless. Her whole look was suspiciously polished, as if this wasn't her first time showing up at someone's door in the wilderness. Something about her seemed overly practiced. "Morning," I said cautiously, opening the door just enough to speak through while keeping my hand braced against the frame. Something about her energy made me unwilling to invite her fully into my space. "Can I help you?" She ignored the greeting entirely. No pleasantries, no smile, just launched right into her lines like she'd been rehearsing them for weeks. "I'm Karen Blackwood, president of the Pine Valley Homeowners Association. I'm here for a mandatory inspection of your property to identify any compliance violations," she declared, her voice sharp and robotic, like she was reciting legal code from memory. She flashed her clipboard and gestured at the cabin like it personally offended her. "We've received several complaints regarding the condition and appearance of this property, as outlined in Section 4.2.7 of the HOA regulations. All residents are subject to quarterly inspections to ensure community standards are being met." She said it like I should be grateful for her presence, like she was doing me a favor by pointing out how I had apparently failed to meet her imaginary standards. Her voice oozed confidence, like she'd pulled this exact move on dozens of others before and gotten her way every time. She had that particular tone, half patronizing, half threatening, that people use when they're used to bulldozing over others using nothing but bureaucracy and fear. It felt like she was about to hand me detention, but I was a grown man, standing on property my family had owned long before she was even born. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process what I'd heard. None of it added up. This woman was claiming control over a cabin deep in the wilderness, bordered by national forest and with no one else for miles. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I replied, doing my best to keep my tone civil even though every instinct in me was telling me this situation was off. It felt like I had stumbled onto the set of some strange hidden camera prank show. "This land isn't part of any homeowners association," I added, sweeping my arm toward the expanse of untouched forest. "My family has owned this place for over 60 years. There's no HOA jurisdiction out here. I'm pretty sure we're the only occupied home for 10 miles. But Karen didn't blink. Her expression didn't shift an inch. It was as if she'd heard this exact protest before and already had her response queued up. Her face stayed calm, professional, and annoyingly patronizing. The kind of look someone gives a child who doesn't understand the rules of the adult world. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I don't care how long you believe your family's owned this property." She spoke slowly, like I was too dense to grasp the basics. The Pine Valley Homeowners Association was formally established in 2019 and includes all residential properties within the designated district regardless of when they were purchased or built. Not knowing the rules doesn't exempt you from following them, and ongoing violations will result in serious fines. With exaggerated care, she flipped through pages on her clipboard like she was consulting some holy document, each motion deliberate and theatrical. The way she held her pen, the angle of her head, it was all practiced, mechanical, like she'd done this act more times than she could count. "This property is currently out of compliance with multiple visual appearance codes," she declared, pointing to various features of my cabin like a crime scene investigator presenting evidence. "Most notably, a broken bar. That flag on your front porch is in violation of our approved color and materials standards." I followed her eyes to the American flag waving gently in the mountain air. That flag had been there longer than I'd been alive. My great-grandfather had hung it himself after returning from World War II, and it had endured through decades of storms, snow, and sunshine. For our family, it wasn't just a decoration, it was a symbol of pride, sacrifice, and independence. I nearly laughed out loud. "You're seriously telling me that an American flag isn't allowed under your home rules?" I asked, now completely dropping any attempt to mask my disbelief. This entire conversation had veered into some surreal parallel universe where patriotism had become a code violation. "That is exactly what I'm telling you," Karen snapped without hesitation. Her voice carried the smug assurance of someone who had spent years unchallenged. "Our community design standards require all decorative elements to adhere to a uniform aesthetic. That includes flags, banners, and other textiles." She went on to reference Section 4.2.7 of their so-called guidelines, claiming it laid out the acceptable flag type as and implying that I would know this if I'd bothered to show up at any of their imaginary monthly meetings. The way she said it made it sound like I'd committed some personal offense by missing them. She completely ignored the glaring issue that I had never received a single notice about such meetings because they didn't exist. Then something strange clicked in my brain. I glanced at her car parked down the driveway, a sleek black SUV license plate from Montana. Why would the president of a Colorado HOA be driving a vehicle registered in an entirely different state? And more importantly, what would motivate someone from Montana to travel all the way out here just to scold me over a decades-old flag on private property? As she turned and marched back to her SUV, leaving behind a trail of dust and entitlement, I stood there feeling unsettled. This wasn't just about aesthetics. Something deeper was going on here. Her whole performance had been too polished, too structured. It was like watching someone run a well-worn playbook, a one they'd used on plenty of others. After she left, I dove headfirst into research mode. I pulled up every database I could think of: public records, local archives, community listings. I searched for anything and everything related to the Pine Valley Homeowners Association. And just like I suspected, a broken bar: nothing. No incorporation filings, no meeting notes, no community announcements, no bylaws or registered board members, no Section 4.2.7 laying out flag regulations. In fact, the Pine Valley HOA didn't exist at all, at least not in Colorado. To make absolutely sure, I called the county office directly. A kind woman on the other end confirmed what I'd already pieced together. There are no registered homeowner associations in that region, she said with a patient tone, clearly used to fielding the occasional confused landowner. That area is entirely unincorporated. Property owners there maintain full control over their own land. There's no governing association or oversight group. Still rattled, I decided to drive over to see Mrs. Cheetah, my only neighbor within reasonable distance. She lived about 2 miles down the winding mountain road, in a cozy house with a thriving vegetable garden she tended with pride. When she opened the door, her warm smile immediately put me at ease. "Jake, what a pleasant surprise," she said, ushering me inside like she always did. "I was just thinking about dropping off some tomatoes from the garden. Best crop I've had in years." But the moment I mentioned the name Karen Blackwood and the so-called Pine Valley HOA, everything changed. Mrs. Chen's cheerful expression vanished almost instantly, replaced with a look of concern and unease. "Oh my, a broken bar," she whispered. "Oh no, a broken bar. She came to see you, too?" Mrs. Chen whispered, her voice barely audible, like she was afraid that Karen might be lurking outside, eavesdropping. She led me into her cozy kitchen, clearly rattled. "That woman showed up at my door just last week," she said, lowering herself into a chair with a sigh. "She had a folder full of documents that looked frighteningly official. Said I owed $2,000 in fines for supposedly violating some community gardening regulations." She opened a manila folder and spread out the contents on the table. Sure enough, the paperwork looked almost identical to what Karen had waved at me. Same formatting, same polished layout. Mrs. Chen explained how Karen had pointed out that her tomato plants were the wrong shade of red and that her garden didn't conform to some kind of neighborhood aesthetic. She told me my vegetables were causing a visual disturbance. A broken bar said they were driving down property values, Mrs. Chen said, her tone somewhere between disbelief and hurt. The idea that tomatoes could devalue anything would have been hilarious if she hadn't looked so genuinely troubled. She was incredibly convincing, Mrs. Chen added, laying out the fake forms for me to inspect. They had professional letterheads, regulation numbers, and legal-sounding jargon. Karen even had a plastic ID badge clipped to her blazer identifying her as an HOA enforcement officer. It was all just fake enough to be terrifyingly real. I studied the forgeries closely. The print quality was exceptional, and every page was crafted to appear legitimate. Compliance deadlines, escalating penalty warnings, even court threats. Whoever put this together had spent serious time and money making sure it passed a quick inspection. "Did you a broken bar pay her anything?" I asked hesitantly, already guessing the answer by the look on Mrs. Chen's face. "I gave her $500, she admitted quietly. She said it would halt the fines while I brought my garden into alignment with the community's standards." She showed me a receipt, printed and stamped with what looked like a real whole logo and just as slick as everything else Karen had used in her act. Apparently, Karen had told her there were over a dozen local properties under investigation, and that the HOA was stepping up enforcement due to multiple complaints. "She made it seem like I was being reckless and unneighborly," Mrs. Chen said, eyes downcast. "Like I was the problem." The more I learned, the angrier I got. This wasn't just some delusional control freak with a clipboard. It was a full-blown con job cleverly designed to exploit people who didn't know how to verify HOA claims, especially older residents who might be easily intimidated by legal threats and fancy paperwork. Mrs. Chen was the perfect target, living alone, far from town, and unfamiliar with HOA procedures. Karen had found someone who trusted what looked official and used that trust against her. Driving back to my cabin, my thoughts were spinning. How many others had Karen duped? How long had she been pulling this scam? Suddenly, the Montana license plate made perfect sense. She was probably traveling from one state to another, hitting isolated areas where homeowners wouldn't have quick access to information and might not even question her story. The documents were too polished, the routine too smooth. This wasn't her first time, and her confidence wasn't just natural arrogance, it was experience. She'd run this play before. As soon as I got home, I dove into research. I scoured every site I could find, message boards, news reports, public records, looking for any mention of fraudulent HOA enforcement in remote areas. What I found confirmed my worst fears. This scam wasn't new. In fact, it was disturbingly widespread. And Karen Blackwood, a broken bar, she wasn't just some overzealous fraudster. She was methodical. She didn't just know my name. She knew everything: where I worked, my bank info, even my mom's address back in Denver. This was no longer just about fake fines or forged documents. It was deeper, more dangerous. Then, at 11 p.m. that Thursday night, just as I was shutting down my laptop after a long day, I got a call. Blocked number. Somehow, I knew exactly who it would be before I picked up. Jake Morrison, the voice said on the other end. Cold, calm, deadly confident. It was Karen. "I'm aware you've been digging into me," she said, "and I know you've spoken with your neighbors about our previous discussions. That was a mistake, a big one." There was no emotion in her voice, just cold deficiency. It was clear she'd been monitoring my activity somehow. That fact alone sent a chill down my spine. "You need to understand something," she continued, her tone shifting into something darker, like she was done playing games. "I have access to resources you can't even begin to comprehend, and my legal authority stretches far beyond your little mountain retreat." She let that sit for a moment, then went in for the kill. "If you continue interfering with my responsibilities as HOA president, you are going to face consequences that will follow you for the rest of your life," she warned. Then came the final blow, spoken like a prosecutor closing a case she'd already won. "I'm giving you one final opportunity to resolve this the right way," she said. "You can pay what you owe, remove that disgraceful flag from your property, and we can move forward like civilized people. Or a broken bar, you can keep resisting, and find out just how much damage a single defiant programmer can do to himself by going up against lawful authority." Click. The next morning, taped to my front door, was a crisp, professionally labeled envelope. My full name and address were printed neatly in bold block letters. Inside was a formal notice of legal proceedings, complete with supposed case numbers, court dates, and a long list of charges: obstruction of official duties, harassment of a community officer, and something bizarrely titled willful violation of housing code standards. The letterhead had state seals. The formatting looked real. Anyone who didn't know better would have been completely fooled. But what truly shook me was the level of personal information contained in the letter: my social security number, my workplace contact, my mother's home address. She had everything. She even had information about my student loans, details I'd never shared with anyone outside my loan servicers or the banks. That same afternoon, I got a call from my manager, his voice tight with concern. "Jake, I've been contacted by someone claiming to be from the Colorado County Attorney's Office," he said. "They were asking about your legal status and whether it could compromise your security clearance for the federal contracts we're working on." My heart dropped. "We need to talk about this," he continued. "HR is getting nervous. If you're involved in ongoing legal trouble, especially harassment claims involving public officials, it's going to be a problem. We can't have people with unresolved legal issues on sensitive assignments." I tried to explain it was all part of a fraud operation. "Elaborate, yes, but still a hoax." I told him about the fake HOA, the impersonated authority figures, the forged paperwork. But as I spoke, I could hear the doubt in his silence. It sounded crazy when you said it out loud. Too crazy. By the end of the week, I wasn't just shaken, I was starting to doubt myself. Karen's documentation was so convincing, her grasp of legal processes, so precise, her ability to gather personal data, downright terrifying. I began to wonder, had I missed something? Was there some obscure county regulation, some regional housing board no one ever mentioned? Could I be wrong? Even my cousin Tommy wasn't helping. He dropped by like he always did on Friday, bringing beer and the latest town gossip. Tommy's a plumber, salt of the earth, and he's usually my voice of reason when I overthink things. Look, Jake, he said, cracking open a can and leaning back in the porch chair, maybe just pay her and be done with it. I mean, if $500 gets her off your back and keeps your job safe, isn't it worth it? He took a sip and gave me a sideways glance. Man, this stuff sounds wild. Boot to broken bar, she's got documents, knows your info, and clearly has connections. Maybe there's some government crap you don't know about. Just saying it might not be worth the fight. It hit hard, hearing Tommy say that. If he was starting to doubt me, maybe I really was making things harder than they needed to be. That Saturday night, I was seriously considering calling Karina just to settle this mess and move on. But before I could do anything, I heard the familiar growl of an old engine pulling into my driveway. My grandfather's battered Ford pickup rolled into view, kicking up dust. Out stepped William Morrison, looking as steady and sharp as ever. Even at 75, he was supposed to be fishing in Alaska with his old detective buddy Essie, yet here he was, 3 weeks early, with the kind of calm authority that said he knew exactly what was going on. "Even in, Jake," he said, flashing that half-smile of his, the one he always gave when he was about to drop a bombshell. "Heard you've been dealing with someone named Karen Blackwood. Mind if we sit down for a chat?" We sat in the kitchen, a warm light overhead, and he opened a thick folder that looked like it came straight from a police archive. What he showed me wasn't just information about Karina, it was a case file, years in the making. "I need you to understand something, son," he said, voice firm, eyes serious. "Karen Blackwood's been running this scheme for nearly 2 decades. She's good, real good, but this time, she messed with the wrong family." Inside the folder was a mountain of evidence, lists of victims, notes, case numbers from different jurisdictions. My grandfather had started tracking her back in 2009, after she devastated a retirement community in Silver Creek, Montana. "That case is what got her on my radar," Grandpa said. "I was with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation back then, working elder fraud cases. 23 families lost their homes because of her fake HOA scam. 3 people died from stress-related heart attacks when the bogus fines led to foreclosure." He showed me photos of before and after shots of the Silver Creek neighborhood, once a modest but vibrant community, now a shell of foreclosed homes and overgrown lots. It was heartbreaking. "She stayed ahead of the law with fake documentation and help from inside," he explained. "She had shady county clerks in her pocket who'd create bogus HOA registrations in the system, so when anyone looked it up it looked legit. By the time authorities caught on, she was already gone." New town, new state, new victims. Inside Grandpa's folder were records from Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and now Colorado. All showed the same playbook: target rural homeowners, especially older folks unfamiliar with how to verify HOA claims, and pressure them with phony documents. I spent the next 2 days calling the people on Grandpa's list of victims who had been waiting years for someone to listen. Maria Santos, just outside Austin, Texas, had lost $5,000 to a fake fence violation fee. Karen had shown up with a man pretending to be a county inspector, claiming her backyard fence was 6 inches too tall and presented a safety risk. "I was working 2 jobs," Maria told me over the phone. "Single mom. I didn't have time to go to court or fight it. I just paid the fine and prayed it would go away. Took me 6 months to find out there was no HOA here. And that guy with her, he wasn't even with the county." Another name on the list, Bob Thompson, from a quiet town near Salt Lake City. His story was just as bad. Karen had hit him for $3,000 over supposed mailbox violations. She gave me this whole pitch about federal postal regulations and how my mailbox didn't meet the aesthetic standards of the community, Bob told me during our call. She even brought someone claiming to be from the U.S. Postal Service who said it posed a delivery hazard. And honestly, she was so polished and confident, I didn't question a thing. It was the same pattern every time: authoritative language, believable documentation, and just enough fear to pressure people into paying. Then there were the Hendersons from Wyoming. They lost their entire cabin. Karen slapped them with a $15,000 fine, claiming their septic system was in violation of environmental safety codes. They couldn't afford the fee and had no choice but to give up their property. What made this operation so dangerous wasn't just Karen's tactics, it was her alliance with her ex-husband, Richard Blackwood, a former lawyer who'd been disbarred years earlier. Richard gave their scheme the appearance of legal weight. He would file court documents a real loan as in jurisdictions where they had connections. With the help of corrupt officials, those documents included legitimate case numbers, making it nearly impossible for victims to distinguish a scam from actual legal proceedings. They made themselves look bulletproof, Grandpa explained as we pored over the evidence. The filings were real, the threats seemed official, and the victims had no idea they were being conned until it was too late. Their operation had spanned nearly 20 years across multiple states, perfected with each new town they targeted. It was professional-level fraud, wrapped in legal jargon and weaponized bureaucracy. To figure out our next move, Grandpa called in Old Alley Deputy Rodriguez, his former partner from his final years in law enforcement. He met us at the cabin, where we laid out the full scope of Karen's recent activity. Our biggest challenge has always been jurisdiction, Rodriguez said, flipping through the thick folder of reports and affidavits. She operates across state lines, preys on isolated communities, and vanishes before anyone catches on. Local law enforcement doesn't have the resources to keep up, and federal agencies have bigger fish to fry. But Rodriguez was more hopeful this time. Karen had slipped up. She stayed in this area longer than usual. She's gotten greedy, too many victims, too fast. And the best part? She has no idea William Morrison is back on the case. We agreed not to take our fight public. No social media blasts, no online rants. Karen was clever and would bolt the moment she suspected she was being cornered. Instead, we organized a private meeting with other victims. Mrs. Chen offered to host it at her home, far away from prying eyes. We needed first-hand accounts, testimonies strong enough to build a criminal case without tipping Karen off. We have to be strategic, Grandpa warned. She's not just clever, she's brutal when she's exposed. If she finds out we're coming for her, she'll vanish before the authorities ever get involved. At this point in the story, things shifted. No longer was this about one guy getting harassed over bogus HOA fines. The stakes had grown, and the mission had become clear. My name's Jason Miller, and I write for the Harper Stories channel. What happens next isn't just the second act of a personal story, it's the transformation of a local problem into a fight against systemic abuse. This is the moment where Jake and his grandfather stop reacting and start pushing back, where a deeply personal injustice becomes a community crusade. Because this wasn't just about Jake anymore. Karen and Richard had already marked 350 senior citizens for their next scammer, each one set to lose $10,000 in fake compliance fees. That's $3.5 million in theft, all set to go down in just 72 hours. We only discovered the full scale of it thanks to Bob Thompson. With his tech skills, Bob cracked into a private server linked to Karen's emails. What he found was jaw-dropping. A highly coordinated plot to defraud the entire Golden Years retirement community near Grand Junction. This isn't just another rural shakedown, Bob said during a secure video meeting. He shared his screen as we all watched in silence. They've spent half a year embedding Karen as a legitimate HOA advisor. She's already got influence, access, and buy-in from residents. And now they're going to hit them all at once with fake federal compliance penalties. The scale was staggering. Dozens of fake inspectors, mountains of fraudulent paperwork, and a tight timeline designed to strip residents of their savings before anyone could realize it was all fake. This time, Grandpa and I weren't going to wait for the aftermath. No more reacting. We were going to act first. She's not going to destroy another community, Grandpa said, standing over the map we laid out across the table. We're going to bait her into exposing everything. Our plan was simple, but deadly effective. We'd invent a story about a rare antique collection hidden in my cabin, items supposedly passed down from my great-grandfather's military service, worth over $500,000. We'd float the rumor in circles we knew would eventually reach Karen's ears. A target that valuable would be impossible for her to ignore. Of course, pulling this off meant getting serious with surveillance. Bob guided us through setting up high-grade hidden cameras and audio equipment throughout the property. The most important thing, Bob explained, is that every second of footage we get has to be legally sound. Chain of custody, clear consent, no gray areas. This has to hold up in court. Deputy Rodriguez helped with the legal side, ensuring we operated within the bounds of the law. Meanwhile, Maria Santos, using her experience in journalism, worked with us to develop a set of questions that might lead Karen to unknowingly incriminate herself on camera. But Karen wasn't going down quietly. In fact, she escalated things almost immediately. Her threats became more personal, more aggressive, via proving she somehow knew we were closing in. The first sign of serious danger came when I discovered the photos early in the morning. Several glossy prints left just inside my front door. Each had clearly been taken with a telephoto lens from deep within the woods surrounding the cabin. The most chilling part, though, wasn't the image as it was what was written on the back of each one. Fire moves fast in dry mountain air. The message was unmistakable. Karen's threats had just escalated from financial coercion to physical intimidation, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. Richard Blackwood followed up shortly after, sending me a thick envelope stuffed with fake legal paperwork. It was a carefully constructed threat accusing me of interfering with legitimate business operations and threatening lawsuits that would supposedly bankrupt me. The documents looked official, with case numbers and court hearing dates designed to seem authentic to anyone who wasn't trained in law. But what disturbed me the most wasn't the documents. It was how much personal information Karen had somehow acquired. She had my mother's work address in Denver, my old college roommate's phone number, even information about my student loan balance, stuff that should have been securely locked behind government-grade firewalls. That's when Deputy Rodriguez gave us a warning during one of our late-night strategy sessions. She's either got connections inside credit agencies, he said grimly, or she's buying stolen data off black market servers. If she was accessing identity theft pipelines, that meant this was far more than a clever scam. We were likely dealing with a well-connected criminal organization, one that used HOA scams as just one front in a larger, darker business. Then came the phone call. What was meant to be a fake negotiation over my so-called flag violations turned into a heated confrontation. Karen slipped. "You think I don't know what it's like to lose everything because of some made-up HOA rules?" she shouted. 20 years ago, I was fighting back against some self-important board trying to take my home. She was furious, her voice raw. They won. I lost my house, my savings, everything I believed in. Now I make sure people like you understand what that feels like. For a brief second, I saw Ida, the broken person underneath all the schemes. She wasn't just a manipulator. She was a former victim, too, but that didn't make her crusade any less dangerous. If anything, it made her worse because she believed what she was doing was some kind of justice. As we dug deeper, it became clear this was much more than a duo of con artists. Karen and Richard had built a sophisticated network. It included corrupt local officials, fake inspectors, and what appeared to be links to international money laundering operations. They were funneling fraudulent HOA fees to clean dirty money from other illicit businesses. "We're not just chasing a scammer anymore," Grandpa said, shaking his head as we reviewed Bob's findings. "This is a full-scale criminal syndicate, and it's been operating under the radar for almost 20 years. It was overwhelming, but it also meant that stopping Karen wouldn't just help us, it could protect countless other towns that were next in line for her operation. Karen had made one fatal error, underestimating my grandfather. She assumed he was just an old man, that I was a quiet tech guy who'd fold under pressure. What she didn't realize was that this cabin had become a well-laid trap, and William Morrison had spent over a decade preparing for exactly this showdown. The final confrontation was set for a crisp October afternoon. Everything we'd built was ready. Maria Santos had taken position a half-mile away, operating professional streaming equipment that would beam the events live to a select group of law enforcement contacts, journalists, and victim advocacy groups. Bob Thompson was monitoring all the hidden cameras from a remote command center. Deputy Rodriguez and several federal agents were staged nearby, waiting for the right moment to move in. Right on schedule, Karen rolled into the driveway in her black SUV, radiating the same smug confidence she had the first time we met. She was followed by a second vehicle. Richard Blackwood sat in the front, flanked by the fake Inspector Martinez and two goons who looked like muscle for hire. Karen emerged wearing a sleek black suit, the same kind of outfit she'd used to fool dozens of towns into compliance. This time, she was carrying a leather folder inside, what looked like an official court order. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, her tone cool and commanding, "I have a binding court order granting immediate access to this property for a full compliance inspection." She lifted the document like it was some kind of enchanted scroll that would make all resistance vanish, and to someone unfamiliar with federal forms, it probably would have worked. It looked real. "This order is issued by the Federal Housing Compliance Division," she said, reading from a prepared statement. "In cooperation with the Regional Environmental Protection Authority, failure to comply will result in immediate federal intervention and possible criminal charges for obstructing official duties." Then Richard stepped forward, adding his signature mix of faux legal bravado. "Mr. Morrison, I strongly suggest you comply," he intoned. "Resisting a federal inspection can have severe consequences, not just for your property, but for your personal freedom." That was the moment Grandpa opened the door. Karen's face changed, just a flicker, but it was there. A crack in her armor. She hadn't expected him to meet her so calmly, so directly. "Hello, Karen," Grandpa said, voice steady. "I've been waiting 15 years for this." Something in his voice made her hesitate. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure. But her pride, her greed was stronger than her instinct for self-preservation. She moved toward the entrance. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are," she snapped, "but this is federal business. You're obstructing a legal inspection. Step aside." She raised her forged court order again like a wand of power. That's when my grandfather made his move here, with a speed and confidence that revealed every bit of his 30 years in law enforcement. Grandpa acted the moment Karen crossed the threshold onto the porch. He grabbed her wrist and spun her around in a fluid motion so sharp and practiced it would have impressed any martial arts instructor. Before she could scream or break away, he had both of her arms locked behind her back. From his coat pocket, he produced a set of authentic police handcuffs, the ones he'd held onto since his days as a detective, and snapped them into place. "Karen Blackwood," he said in a voice filled with command, "you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, and trespassing." Karen thrashed against the cuffs, but her struggle was pointless. "You have the right to remain silent," Grandpa continued, cold and clear, "and I suggest you use that right now." The sharp click of the cuffs closing was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. That was the moment her long-running scheme of 15 years of deceit and manipulation finally came crashing down. Just as planned, Bob activated the cabin's hidden camera system at the perfect time, capturing the look of disbelief and fury on Karen's face and broadcasting it live to a select group of journalists, law enforcement, and victims. She screamed in defiance, "This is illegal. You can't do this. I have federal jurisdiction. You're kidnapping me." But the more she shouted, the more obvious it became that she'd been caught red-handed. Her performance fell apart in front of a growing virtual audience. Richard Blackwood panicked when he saw Karen in cuffs and made a break for a bad move. Before he could get more than a few steps down the driveway, Deputy Rodriguez and two plainclothes FBI agents emerged from their hiding places and tackled him hard to the gravel. Inspector Martins of the fake ONIA shocked everyone by immediately surrendering. "I want a deal," he yelled, raising his hands as agents rushed in. "I'll give you everything: bank accounts, names, files. Just get me immunity." The two muscle-bound enforcers Karen brought along took one glance at the federal badges and didn't wait for instructions. They dropped to their knees, hands behind their heads, practically begging not to be arrested. The live stream exploded. Within hours, The #grandpa handcuffs Karen was trending nationwide. Local news stations picked it up almost instantly, and by that evening, we were fielding interview requests from major media outlets. The story of a quiet mountain community fighting back against organized crime had captured the nation's attention. As the agents prepared to haul Karen off, Grandpa looked her dead in the eyes. 15 years ago, you slipped through the cracks because I didn't have enough proof, he said quietly. But today, justice caught up with you. The look on her face of shock, disbelief, defeat was etched into my memory. All the stress, the fear, the uncertainty, a broken bar. It was finally worth it. The investigation revealed that Karen's operation had stolen a staggering $4.7 million from more than 200 families across several states. But the real reckoning had only just begun. 2 months later, the federal courthouse in Denver became the center of one of the most high-profile fraud trials in the state's recent history. Victims came from 8 different states to witness it. They wanted to see the woman who had tormented them finally held accountable. The prosecution's case was ironclad. Between our surveillance footage, Bob's meticulous digital evidence, and dozens of victim testimonies, there was no wiggle room left for Karen's defense. But of course, her new lawyer tried. In opening arguments, he painted Karen as a deeply wounded individual, scarred by trauma and manipulated by more dangerous people. He claimed her involvement stemmed from untreated PTSD linked to her own experience with HOA scams decades ago. She was preyed upon by seasoned criminals who exploited her emotional instability, her attorney said. But nobody was buying it. Richard Blackwood, trying to save himself, turned on Karen instantly. He insisted he'd been coerced, that she'd masterminded everything, and that he'd never fully understood the extent of the fraud. It was a transparent attempt to deflect blame, but prosecutors used it to bolster their case. Meanwhile, County Clerk Johnson had already taken a plea deal in exchange for exposing the full scope of corruption. He provided evidence of fake HOA entities, forged paperwork, and database manipulations that gave the operation a false appearance of legitimacy. During the 3rd week of the trial, Grandpa and I were called to testify. I'll never forget watching the jury's reaction when the prosecution played the footage from the cabin. Karen's calculated demeanor, her fabricated authority, her cold threats, it was all captured in perfect clarity. There was no room left for excuses. This, the prosecutor said, pointing to the video where Karen demanded entry with forged documents, is not the behavior of a traumatized victim. This is the behavior of a professional con artist, a one who has honed her technique over years of deception and intimidation. Karen was never going to stop unless someone forced her to. Thankfully, the 15 years of evidence my grandfather had tirelessly compiled revealed a clear and consistent pattern of calculated fraud, proving once and for all that her actions were far from isolated incidents. The sentencing went beyond anything we had dared to hope. It sent a powerful message: targeting seniors through fraud would be met with the full force of federal justice. Karen was given 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2 million in restitution, ensuring that she'd spend the rest of her active years behind bars, while her victims began to recover what was taken from them. Richard was handed an 8-year sentence, along with permanent disbarment and a $1 million fine. His days of manipulating the legal system for personal gain were over. Clerk Johnson, who had played a key role in the scheme, received 4 years in prison. His employment was terminated immediately, and his pension was forfeited to help repay victims. As for Martin Z, the so-called Inspectora, his full cooperation earned him 2 years of probation and mandatory community service. He was also required to testify in related trials as authorities dismantled the wider criminal operation. One of the most powerful outcomes came not from the courtroom, but from the transformation within our own neighborhood. The residents of Golden Years community banded together to create what they named the Morrison Protocol, a comprehensive verification system designed to ensure no outside group could ever falsely claim whole authority again. "We're done being victims," Grandma Betty declared. At 85, this former union organizer had become the spirited heart of the community. Under her leadership, every resident was trained to check county records, authenticate official documents, and contact authorities at the first sign of anything suspicious. A mutual aid network was also formed, offering financial and emotional support to anyone feeling overwhelmed or targeted. What began as fraud prevention evolved into a true safety net. I contributed by launching verifymyhoa.org, a free platform that helps seniors and rural property owners confirm the legitimacy of any group claiming homeowners association authority. It featured verified HOA directories, document verification guides, and links to official government databases. Within 6 months, the site had helped more than 50,000 users and uncovered fake HOA scams in a dozen different states. Journalist Maria Santos chronicled our story in a powerful investigative series that earned a Pulitzer Prize nomination and directly inspired new federal legislation, increasing the penalties for crimes targeting elderly communities. And the cabana, that quiet place where it all began, became more than just a workspace. Emily Rodriguez, who had organized volunteers throughout the investigation, became my girlfriend and my partner in expanding our efforts across the state. Together, we converted part of the cabin into the Elder Justice Retreat, a place where seniors could come for workshops on fraud prevention, legal empowerment, and community action. Each year, we hosted Morrison Day, a regional gathering that brought together victims, advocates, and law enforcement to share resources, strategies, and stories of survival. Exactly 1 year after Karen's sentencing, Grandpa and Grandma Betty were married at the cabin, surrounded by over 300 guests of people who had fought alongside us, learned from our journey, or simply come to celebrate the triumph of community over corruption. The reception was filled with powerful testimonies from survivors, investigators, and activists inspired by our story to launch protective programs in their own towns. Justice isn't always about punishment, Grandpa said during his toast. It's about protection, unity, and making sure no one else goes through what we did. Today, the American flag still waves proudly over the porch. It's now joined by a POW, Mia banner, honoring Grandpa and all veterans who continue to fight for justice long after their service ends. Because some battles are worth waiting for and some victories belong to entire communities, not just individuals. Have you ever felt helpless in the face of someone abusing their authority? Like Karen, people who rely on fear and fake power can be stopped when good people stand their ground, gather evidence, and refuse to be intimidated. Jake and his grandfather proved that courage and community can defeat even the most intricate of scams. Your story matters, and your voice could be the one that protects someone else. If this story of resilience and justice moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Ya Story, so where ordinary people win extraordinary battles against deception and abuse. Thank you for watching. If your neighbor ever tried to sue you over your lawn, just know Ya Stories is here to bring you hope, laughter, and a little justice along the way. Hit subscribe so you never miss another tale of suburban drama with a twist of truth and a dash of joy.